The glow of a single desk lamp painted the office in warm amber as Alexander Reed, a self-made millionaire, leaned back in his leather chair, scrolling through late-night emails. Most were predictable: proposals, contracts, invitations, but one subject line made him pause. "Please, someone help me." His brow furrowed. It wasn't addressed to him at all. Still, curiosity tugged, and with one click, her desperate words filled his screen, unpolished and raw. The message read like a whisper from another world. A mother begged for formula, for rent, for the chance to breathe without fear. She confessed she didn't know how much longer she could keep going. Her words were cracked porcelain, fragile and honest, spilling pain he had never tasted. Alexander's chest tightened, as though the plea had been written directly to him, though he knew it was a mistake. Before we dive deeper into this story, think about this for a moment. What would you do if a stranger's message for help landed in your hands? Would you ignore it, or would you answer? If this question already stirs something in you, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and tell me in the comments, because your voice matters here. Now, let's return to the beginning of her journey. Her name was Claire, a young mother, her nights blurred into days, her arms always aching from cradling her restless baby. In a one-bedroom apartment, wallpaper peeling at the edges, she typed on a second-hand phone with a cracked screen. Bills lay unopened on the table, shadows swallowing the corners of the room. Exhaustion pressed heavy, but still she wrote, fingers trembling as she searched for hope. Claire never intended for the message to reach a millionaire. It was supposed to go to a small community charity, the kind that sometimes left food baskets by worn-out doors. But her hands shook, her eyes blurred with tears, and a wrong tap sent her plea into the digital void. She had no idea that far above the city's restless streets, a man who thought he had everything would be stopped cold by her words. Her life had become survival stitched together with borrowed kindness. 2 jobs left her too tired to breathe, yet not enough to cover diapers and heat. Neighbors tried to help, but their pockets were just as empty. Nights were the hardest, when the baby cried and she couldn't soothe him with more than lullabies and thin blankets. In those hours, Claire's loneliness pressed against her like a second skin. Across town, Alexander stared at her words, reading them twice, 3 times. He was used to proposals dripping with flattery, demands cloaked in politeness. But this was different. Her honesty didn't ask for pity. It was survival stripped bare, and it cut through the sterile perfection of his office like a sharp breath of winter air. He realized he was holding his breath. He considered deleting the message, convincing himself it wasn't his problem. He had investments to guard, meetings to attend, a life neatly scheduled down to the last minute. But as he glanced at the city skyline through his window, towers glowing against the dark, he felt how hollow it all was. The silence of his penthouse mocked him, and Claire's plea refused to let go. Meanwhile, Claire set her phone down and rocked her baby to sleep. The little boy's fists unclenched slowly, his breathing evening out as he curled against her chest. She whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep, pressing her cheek against his soft hair. She believed her message would vanish into nothing, unseen, unheard. She couldn't know it had already reached someone whose life was about to intertwine with hers. And so, with one accidental message, 2 lives began to shift. A millionaire who thought he had everything, and a mother who had nearly nothing were pulled into the same current. Neither could see the storms waiting ahead, or the shadows of the past that would soon rise to claim her. For now, all that existed was the fragile thread of words, and the man who had chosen to answer them. Morning light crept through thin curtains, brushing across the faded carpet of Claire's small apartment. The baby stirred in his crib, his cries echoing against walls that seemed to press closer each day. Claire rubbed her eyes, her body heavy with sleepless nights, and forced herself to rise. The kitchen offered little comfort. An empty fridge, a chipped mug with lukewarm tea, and bills stacked like silent accusations. She balanced the baby on her hip as she checked her bank account again, though she already knew the answer. Numbers dipped lower than hope itself, reminding her that even her double shifts weren't enough. She worked at a diner by day and cleaned offices by night, but paychecks evaporated as quickly as they came. Rent loomed, electricity threatened to vanish, and baby formula grew scarcer. Her heart ached with the weight of constant failure. Neighbors sometimes slipped her kindness, a bag of hand-me-down clothes, a loaf of bread left at her door. Yet even generosity couldn't stretch far enough. Claire hated the look in their eyes, pity mixed with exhaustion, as if they too carried burdens too heavy to share. Pride told her not to accept, but motherhood silenced pride. She had to take whatever would keep her son fed and warm. Each morning began with the same ritual, counting coins, sighing over lists she couldn't fulfill, and pushing back the fear that someday soon she would lose everything. The cracked blanket wrapped around her son wasn't just fabric, it was the only shield she could offer against a world that demanded too much. The heater groaned weakly, coughing out more cold than warmth, and Claire pulled her coat tighter even indoors. At the diner, the scent of frying oil clung to her hair and skin, reminding her of hours spent refilling coffee cups for strangers. She plastered on a smile, though her body screamed for rest. Customers never guessed the storm inside her. To them, she was simply the waitress. Her hands shook when tips were small, because she knew every coin meant another night with lights on or another bottle of milk for her son. By evening, exhaustion blurred her vision as she returned home with aching feet. The baby greeted her with open arms, unaware of her struggles, and she found strength in his innocence. Yet as she laid him down, hunger gnawed at her stomach, reminding her she often chose his meals over her own. Her reflection in the cracked mirror showed hollow eyes, but behind them still glimmered a stubborn flame. She would not give up. That night, as shadows swallowed the apartment, Claire picked up her phone again. She wasn't sure what she was hoping for. Perhaps silence, perhaps rejection. Her thumb hovered over the screen before opening her inbox. For a moment, she thought fatigue was playing tricks on her, but no, it was real, a reply from the message she had sent into the void. Her breath caught as she read the words. The tone was careful, formal, yet human. Not what she expected from anyone, certainly not from someone like him. He hadn't sent money, nor had he dismissed her. He had simply written, "I read your message. Tell me more. I'm listening." The simplicity of it rattled her more than an outright refusal would have. Claire stared at the glowing screen, her pulse quickening. Could she trust a stranger? Could she risk opening her life to someone she didn't know? She bit her lip, fear and hope waging war inside her. She wanted to believe in kindness, yet life had taught her that kindness often came with hidden costs. Still, something about the reply felt different. For the first time in months, she felt less invisible. She held her son closer, his small hand clutching her sleeve as if anchoring her to courage. The weight of the day pressed down, but the message whispered possibility. She didn't know yet who was on the other side or how profoundly he would change her life. All she knew was that someone was listening, and that alone was enough to keep her going another night. Claire sat on the edge of her worn sofa, phone in hand, rereading his short reply. The words were simple, but they carried weight. "I'm listening." She had grown used to silence, to unanswered calls for help, to doors closing. Yet now, somewhere beyond her world of peeling paint and empty cupboards, someone had paused to acknowledge her voice. Her heart beat faster than she wanted to admit. Her fingers hesitated above the keyboard. What could she possibly say? That she was drowning in debt, that every night felt like a battle she was losing. Shame threatened to paralyze her, whispering that he would judge her the way others had. But then she looked at her son sleeping in the crib, his chest rising and falling softly, and the courage to type came back. "Things are hard," she wrote. "I'm just trying to keep my baby safe." She pressed send and instantly regretted it, as if she had revealed too much. Yet the response didn't take long. His words arrived steady, almost reassuring. "I can't imagine what you're going through. Tell me more if you can." It wasn't pity, it was curiosity wrapped in gentleness. On the other side of the city, Alexander leaned back in his chair, surprised by how invested he felt. He had expected nothing when he replied, maybe silence, maybe anger. Instead, her honesty drew him closer. He pictured a woman holding her child with tired arms, choosing hope even in despair. It stirred something in him that wealth had never touched. He typed carefully, avoiding the arrogance that usually accompanied his world. "I don't want to intrude," he wrote, "but if sharing eases the burden, I'm here." He stopped to stare at his reflection in the blackened window of his office, wondering when he had last spoken with such sincerity. Money had insulated him from real conversations, but her raw words had cut through that barrier. Claire blinked at his reply, conflicted. She had seen too many men who promised kindness only to take advantage later. Was this another trap? But something about his tone felt different. It lacked the coldness she expected. She found herself answering with fragments of her story, about long shifts, about bills she couldn't pay, about a loneliness that gnawed at her each night. Alexander read every line slowly, almost reverently. Her story wasn't statistics on a page, it was life spilling out through a cracked screen. He felt anger at the world's indifference, but also a strange admiration for her strength. She wasn't begging, she was surviving, and survival, he realized, was more noble than any business empire he had built. As the conversation stretched into the night, a fragile thread formed between them. Words traveled across digital space like stepping stones, bridging two worlds that never should have touched. Claire still held back details, protecting herself, but she couldn't deny the small comfort in being heard. For the first time in a long while, her loneliness eased just enough to let hope slip in. Alexander closed his laptop, but couldn't shake the lingering pull of her words. He had attended banquets, signed contracts, and dined with people who smiled without meaning it. Yet none of that felt as real as a single mother's trembling confession from a dimly lit apartment. Something inside him told him this was only the beginning. And Claire, curling up with her baby beside her, whispered into the darkness, "Maybe it's okay to trust. Just a little." The night was still heavy, the future uncertain, but her chest felt lighter. She didn't know if she was walking into danger or rescue. All she knew was that for the first time in months, she wasn't completely alone. The days that followed revealed just how different their lives were. For Alexander, mornings began with polished shoes, sleek cars, and offices that smelled faintly of leather and ambition. His schedule overflowed with meetings and calls, yet none of it stirred him the way Claire's late-night messages did. For her, mornings began with hunger, with coins scraped from a jar, and with a baby tugging at her shirt for comfort she could barely afford. Claire stretched every dollar until it frayed. At the grocery store, she held formula in one hand and diapers in the other, forced to choose which mattered more that week. Her son's soft cries broke her heart as she settled for less. Meanwhile, Alexander attended a charity gala, champagne flute in hand, surrounded by gowns and tuxedos. Yet as he clinked glasses, he couldn't shake the thought of a mother staring at empty shelves. The contrast sharpened each night when their worlds brushed together again through text. Claire described her shift at the diner, grease clinging to her clothes, her feet swollen and sore. Alexander confessed that despite his wealth, the rooms of his penthouse often felt colder than the night sky. She laughed at the irony of it, her cramped apartment warmer in spirit than his glass castle. For a fleeting moment, she didn't feel lesser. Their conversations danced carefully around personal details. Claire shared stories of her son's first smile, his fascination with ceiling fans, the way his laughter softened even the hardest days. Alexander found himself smiling at her descriptions, imagining sounds and faces he had never known. In return, he spoke of his late mother's kindness, of how she had taught him that success meant little without compassion. But behind Claire's words was a silence she didn't explain. She never mentioned her past relationship, the father of her child, or the reason shadows lingered outside her window. Alexander sensed it, though he didn't push. He knew wounds hidden too deeply could only be revealed in time. Instead, he focused on listening, offering presence where others had vanished. For Claire, the attention felt almost unreal. Here was a man with more money than she could imagine, choosing to spend his nights hearing about her cracked kettle and her son's favorite lullaby. It felt both comforting and terrifying. She wanted to believe in his sincerity, yet doubt crept in like a draft under the door. What did he really want from her? Alexander, too, wrestled with his thoughts. He told himself it was curiosity, empathy, perhaps even obligation. But late at night, staring at the city lights, he wondered if it was more. Her resilience stirred something he couldn't name. She had little, yet she fought fiercely for it. He had everything, yet felt he had nothing worth fighting for. Their bond grew in shadows, invisible to the world around them. To outsiders, they were strangers with no reason to connect. But in the quiet glow of screens, two voices found each other, steadying hearts that had been too long adrift. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was recognition, as if two lonely souls had finally caught sight of one another across a vast ocean. Still, distance remained. Alexander returned each night to silence, echoing in marble halls. Claire returned each night to fears scratching at her door, to the memory of a man whose shadow still haunted her. Neither spoke of it, but both felt the storm gathering just beyond reach. The fragile thread they had woven trembled in the wind, and though neither could see it yet, that thread was about to be tested. Because while Alexander's world was gilded and Claire's was fragile, both were about to collide with a past that refused to stay buried. It was a rainy evening when the knock came. Claire froze, her son bundled in her arms, his soft cries muffled against her chest. The sound was sharp, demanding, nothing like the neighbor's polite tap. Her stomach clenched. She hadn't heard that knock in months, yet her body recognized it instantly. A chill spread through her bones before she even reached the door. "Open up, Claire," a rough voice called, deep and too familiar. Her knees weakened, and her grip on the baby tightened. She whispered soothingly to him, though her own voice trembled. She peeked through the cracked blinds and saw him, broad shoulders hunched against the rain, fists clenched at his sides. The past had found her doorstep again, dripping water and menace. She didn't answer, but silence never stopped him. His voice rose, part threat, part charm, the way it always had. "You can't keep my son from me. I have rights, and you know you owe me." His words dripped with alcohol, and even through the glass, she could smell the sharp tang of it. Her baby whimpered louder, sensing the storm in his mother's body. Claire stepped back, heart racing, rocking her son as if the motion alone could shield him. She remembered nights of broken plates and shouted insults, the smell of whiskey on his breath as he cornered her. She had clawed her way out of that darkness once. But now it loomed again, pressing its shadow against her fragile home. The knocking turned to pounding, the door shuddering under his weight. Claire whispered, "Go away," though the words barely escaped her lips. Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to open the door. Fear wrapped around her like chains, yet within it pulsed a stubborn spark. She would not let him take her child. Not again. Finally, the pounding stopped. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the baby's cries and Claire's uneven breaths. She dared to look outside again. He was gone, or at least she thought so. But even in absence, his presence lingered like smoke. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind made her flinch. The nightmare had returned, and it would not vanish easily. She sat on the sofa, clutching her baby, rocking back and forth. Memories assaulted her, bruises hidden beneath sleeves, neighbors pretending not to hear, promises he had made and broken. The weight of his shadow pressed down harder than the night air. She felt like the walls themselves were whispering, "He's coming back." Across the city, Alexander's phone buzzed with a new message from Claire, though at first it was nearly unreadable. The words were scattered, trembling, like hands shaking over the keyboard. "He's back. He found me." He sat up straighter, a jolt of anger rushing through him. The polished calm of his office cracked under the urgency in her voice. He wanted to storm across town immediately, to stand between her and that shadow. But he knew he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he typed quickly, "Lock the doors. You're not alone anymore. Tell me everything." His jaw tightened as he hit send. For the first time in years, Alexander felt something stronger than business obligations, the desperate need to protect. Claire read his reply through tears, her chest tightening. The fear didn't vanish, but for the first time in hours, she felt a thread of safety, thin but real. She kissed her son's damp hair and whispered, "We'll be okay, I promise." Yet deep inside, she knew promises meant little when shadows learned to find their way back. The morning after his return, Claire's hands still shook as she held her phone. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and her baby clung to her shirt, sensing the tension pulsing through her veins. She had spent the night pacing, listening for footsteps outside her door. Every creak of the floorboards made her jump. Finally, exhaustion pushed her to do what she had avoided for so long, tell someone the truth. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she typed a message to Alexander. She had told herself he didn't need to know. He was a stranger, a man from a world of wealth and distance, but fear had stripped her pride bare. "My ex came back last night," she wrote. "He used to hurt me. I thought he was gone for good. I'm scared he'll take my baby." When Alexander read the words, his throat tightened. He imagined the trembling. Behind each letter, the courage it took to confess such wounds. His office suddenly felt suffocating, its marble floors cold beneath his restless steps. Rage stirred in his chest, not only at the man who had hurt her, but at the world that had forced her into silence. He typed carefully, "You don't deserve this. You and your son deserve safety. Tell me everything." Claire hesitated, then poured her memories into the screen. She told him of years, living under fists and fear, of neighbors who turned away, of nights when she shielded her child inside her body. Her words stumbled and broke, but Alexander read each one as though they were carved in stone. He could almost hear her voice shaking with every confession. Tears blurred her vision as she wrote. Admitting it out loud, though only in text, felt like reopening wounds she had stitched shut with trembling hands. Yet there was release in it too. For the first time, she didn't feel completely invisible. Someone was listening, truly listening, without judgment or impatience. She braced for pity, for dismissal, but none came. Instead, Alexander replied with steadiness, "You are stronger than you know. I believe you, and I won't let you face this alone." She stared at his words, disbelieving. No one had ever said those things to her. People had told her to be tougher, to endure, to forgive. But never that she had already been strong. Never. That she deserved better. Her baby stirred in her arms, his tiny hand brushing against her cheek, grounding her. She kissed his forehead, whispering promises she hoped she could keep. Sharing her story didn't erase the danger outside her door, but it cracked the walls she had built around her heart. Fear still lingered, but so did a new sensation she barely recognized: relief. Alexander sat at his desk, unable to focus on contracts or figures. The image of Claire clutching her baby haunted him. He felt powerless behind screens and distance, yet more determined than ever. He vowed to do something, not as a billionaire, not as a man of influence, but as a human being. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Wealth means nothing if you turn away from those in pain. Claire wiped her tears, uncertain whether she had made a mistake. What if he thought she was weak? What if he disappeared like so many others had when her truth became too heavy? But when her phone buzzed again, her breath caught. His message was clear and resolute. You are not weak, and I will not walk away. For the first time in years, Claire allowed herself to exhale. The shadows outside were still real, the threat still looming, but she no longer felt completely defenseless. Someone knew her story now. Someone cared. And even if the future was uncertain, the act of sharing her truth had lit a fragile flame in the darkness. The morning sun filtered weakly through Claire's curtains, casting golden stripes across the cluttered floor. She sat on the edge of her bed, rereading Alexander's last message. You are not weak, and I will not walk away. The words comforted her, but also frightened her. She had learned the hard way that help often came with chains attached. Could she really trust someone she had never met? Her phone buzzed again, and his message appeared. Claire, let me help. Not just with bills. Let me make sure you and your baby are safe. Her chest tightened. It sounded too much like a lifeline, too much like surrender. Pride rose like a wall inside her. She had fought too hard to escape one man's control. She couldn't risk falling into another's. I can't accept money, she typed quickly, almost angrily. I don't want charity, I just needed someone to listen. She hit send, her hands trembling. Shame and stubbornness tangled inside her. What if he thought she was ungrateful? What if he gave up on her now? The silence that followed felt heavier than the rain clouds outside her window. When Alexander replied, his words were steady, without judgment. This isn't charity, it's justice. No one should live in fear. I want to help because I believe in you, not because I pity you. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair, frustrated at how inadequate text felt. If he could, he would have stood. Outside her door, that very second, Claire's eyes filled with tears. Justice. No one had ever used that word for her. People had told her to endure, to forgive, to move on, but never that she deserved to be defended. Yet even so, fear kept her from saying yes. She glanced at her son, asleep in his crib, and whispered, I can't risk trusting the wrong person again. Alexander sensed her hesitation and softened his tone. Then let's start small. Let me help with advice, with support. No strings attached. If you don't feel safe, you can walk away at any time. He waited, restless, staring at his phone as if his determination could cross the distance between them. Her heart warred with itself. Part of her longed to accept, just to feel less alone in the fight. Another part screamed to guard herself, to keep every wall intact. She had spent years rebuilding her fragile independence. If she let him in, would she lose it all again? She pressed her face into her hands, shaking under the weight of the decision. The baby stirred, letting out a small cry, and Claire lifted him into her arms. His warmth steadied her. She knew the world outside was dangerous, that her ex would not stop until he had broken her. Maybe Alexander's help was the only shield she had left, but saying yes felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing what waited below. She typed slowly, choosing her words with care. I can't promise I'll accept help, but I don't want to face this alone anymore. Her finger hovered before pressing send, her pulse racing. It wasn't surrender. It was the smallest crack in the door she had kept bolted shut for so long. Alexander's chest eased as he read her words. It wasn't agreement, not yet, but it was trust beginning to bloom. He whispered to himself, "That's enough. For now." Because sometimes salvation didn't come in grand gestures. Sometimes it started with a single step, a fragile opening, a whisper of hope carried between two people who refused to let go. That night, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse, staring at the city lights. From this height, the streets looked like veins of gold threading through darkness, yet they filled him with no pride. He had everything he thought he wanted: wealth, power, the respect of powerful men. But Claire's words clung to him like an echo, reminding him of what he lacked. His life was full, but his heart was empty. He thought of his mother, the only person who had ever made him feel truly seen. She used to say, "Kindness is the only treasure worth guarding." Alexander had buried that memory under layers of ambition, chasing numbers instead of meaning. Now, hearing Claire's quiet strength, her resilience carved from pain, he felt his mother's voice stirring again. For the first time in years, he let himself listen. Meanwhile, Claire sat cross-legged on her sofa, her baby asleep beside her, phone glowing in her hands. She hesitated before typing, then sent a small confession. "Sometimes I feel like I don't exist outside of being a mother. Like the world only sees me when I fail." She regretted it instantly, but the words were gone, carried into the void of their fragile connection. His reply came quickly. "I know the feeling. People see my money, not me. They think success means happiness, but the truth is, I've never felt more alone." Claire stared at the screen, stunned. The idea that someone like him, someone who had everything, could feel invisible, struck her like lightning. She whispered into the dark, "Maybe we're not so different." Their conversation stretched on, unraveling small truths neither had shared in years. She told him about her favorite lullaby, how singing it made her feel less afraid. He admitted he hadn't laughed in months, not since his last hollow party, where everyone smiled but nobody cared. Vulnerability became the bridge they walked across, step by step, unsure but steady. At one point, Claire wrote, "Sometimes I imagine what peace would feel like, just one night without fear." Alexander read it twice, his jaw tightening. Then he replied, "Maybe one day you won't have to imagine it." For her, those words felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For him, they felt like a promise he couldn't let himself break. Then, almost unexpectedly, humor slipped in. Claire described how her baby had tried to chew on her phone that morning, drooling all over the cracked screen. Alexander laughed aloud, startling himself with the sound. He texted back, "That phone has survived more battles than some of my board members." Claire chuckled softly, her shoulders easing for the first time in days. That small exchange was more powerful than either realized. For Claire, laughter felt like proof that fear hadn't stolen everything. For Alexander, it reminded him that life could still surprise him, that joy didn't come from marble floors or polished cars, but from a tired mother laughing in the dark. Their armor cracked, letting in a sliver of light. But as the night deepened, Claire's eyes drifted toward the window. Beyond the glass, the world still held shadows, and one of them wore the face of her ex, the peep. Laughter faded, replaced by the lingering knowledge that danger had not gone. She tucked her baby closer, whispering promises to protect him no matter what. And Alexander, staring at his reflection in the darkened window, felt the weight of a decision forming. He could no longer remain a distant confidant. He would need to step into her world, to stand between her and the storm. For though their words had begun to heal, he knew the shadows were drawing closer. The diner was buzzing with the usual morning rush. Coffee cups clinking, the hiss of bacon on the grill, the smell of grease and sugar in the air. Claire tied her apron tighter, forcing a smile as she balanced plates across the floor. Her baby was with the neighbor for a few hours, safe, or so she hoped. She wiped sweat from her brow, praying today would pass quietly. Then the door slammed open with a force that silenced the room. Heads turned as a tall man with storm in his eyes stepped inside. His clothes were rumpled, his breath heavy with alcohol, though it was still early morning. Claire's heart dropped to her stomach. It was him, her ex. The shadow she had prayed would stay away had now walked straight into her workplace. "Claire!" he barked, loud enough to rattle cups on the counter. The room froze. A fork clattered to the floor in the corner, but no one moved to pick it up. He swaggered closer, his fists stuffed into his jacket pockets, a sneer tugging at his lips. "Thought you could ignore me? Thought you could raise my kid without me?" His voice dripped venom. Claire's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot. She tried to stay calm, to keep her voice steady, but fear crawled up her throat. "Please, not here. Just leave." She knew begging would only fuel him, but her knees felt weak. Customers glanced at each other nervously, but no one intervened. The silence was suffocating. He slammed his fist onto a table, making glasses jump. "You think you can shut me out? You owe me, Claire. All those years, and now you want to play the victim?" His words echoed through the diner, humiliating her in front of strangers. She wished the floor would swallow her whole. The smell of burnt toast filled the air, sharp and choking. Her boss appeared from the kitchen, face pale, but hesitant to step in. "Sir, you need to calm down or leave," he muttered. The ex turned on him with a glare that could cut steel. "Stay out of this. This is family business." His hand twitched dangerously at his side, and the boss backed away, helpless. Claire felt cornered, her escape routes shrinking. Her baby's face flashed in her mind, soft, innocent, unaware of this storm. She gripped the counter to steady herself. "I won't give you anything," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the noise. Her ex leaned in closer, his breath hot with alcohol. "You think some fancy charity's gonna save you? Think again. I'll get..." "What's mine? One way or another." The weight of his words crushed her, but somewhere deep inside a spark of defiance lit. She refused to let him see her crumble completely. With shaky hands, she pulled out her phone, slipping it under her apron. She typed blindly, sending a trembling message. "He's here! He found me again! Please!" Her thumb hit send before she could lose courage. Across the city, Alexander's phone buzzed. He was in the middle of a meeting, a polished table surrounded by polished men, but her message cut through everything. His heart pounded as he read her words. Rage and urgency surged, drowning out the drone of corporate talk. He stood abruptly, ignoring the confused stares, already dialing her number. Back in the diner, Claire's ex smirked, mistaking her silence for defeat. He leaned back, spreading his arms like a conqueror claiming victory. But deep down, Claire knew this wasn't over. For the first time, she had someone to call. And though fear clutched her heart, she clung to that fragile truth. She was no longer facing the storm alone. Claire sat outside the diner after her shift, hands trembling as she held her phone. The confrontation replayed in her mind like a nightmare that refused to end. She felt small, humiliated, and terrified of what might come next. But when Alexander's voice finally broke through the static of her fear, something inside her steadied. "You don't have to face him alone anymore," he said firmly. His voice carried a calm authority, but beneath it burned a quiet fury. He had spent years negotiating with men twice his size in boardrooms, but this was different. This wasn't about money or contracts. It was about lives. "Claire," he said, "you need protection. The law can help, but you have to take the first step." A restraining order, legal action, something that tells him there are lines he cannot cross. Claire swallowed hard. The thought of dragging her ex into court made her stomach twist. She imagined him sneering at her, mocking her for thinking the law could stop him. "He won't care about papers," she whispered. "He'll just get angrier." Fear wrapped around her throat, but Alexander's steady breathing on the other end of the call anchored her. "He'll care when he realizes you're not alone," Alexander replied. His tone sharpened, each word clipped with conviction. "The law isn't perfect, but it's a weapon, and right now you need every weapon you can get, and I'll make sure you have the best." Claire sat in silence, tears slipping down her cheeks, wondering why this stranger cared so much. That evening, she met with a volunteer lawyer Alexander had arranged. The office smelled faintly of old books and coffee, its walls lined with certificates. Claire felt out of place, her thrift store clothes clinging to her like labels of shame. But the lawyer's eyes were kind as he walked her through options, explaining each step with patience. For the first time, she saw a path forward. Back home, her son cooed as she laid him in his crib. She whispered promises into his hair. "I'm trying, baby. I'm fighting for us." Yet in the quiet, doubt returned. Would a piece of paper really keep them safe? Or was she just painting a target on their backs? She hugged him tighter, praying she hadn't just made everything worse. Meanwhile, Alexander sat in his office, the city skyline gleaming behind him. Contracts and deals lay forgotten on his desk. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Claire and her child. He had made countless investments, but this was the first time his wealth felt like it could be used for something truly meaningful. He vowed to be more than a distant helper. The next day, Claire clutched the documents in her hands, her name printed in bold black ink. She had drawn a line, fragile but real. Her ex might mock it, might rage against it, but she had claimed her first victory, the courage to say no. Standing outside the courthouse, she felt a flicker of pride burn through her fear. That night, she texted Alexander, "It's done. I'm terrified, but it's done." His reply came instantly. "You are braver than you realize. This is only the beginning, and I'll stand with you until the end." Claire read his words 3 times, her hands shaking. Not from fear, but from the strange warmth of being believed. Yet as she placed her phone down, a shadow lingered outside her window. Her ex had always thrived on control, and he would not give it up easily. Claire knew the line she had drawn might be the very thing that pushed him to cross it. The battle was only beginning, and the storm was far from over. The first threat came as a note shoved under Claire's door. The paper was crumpled, the handwriting jagged. "You can't hide my son from me. Next time, I won't knock." Her hands shook as she read it, the words blurring through her tears. She locked the door twice, then sat on the floor with her baby in her arms, rocking him as if her body could be a fortress. Days later, the threats grew bolder. Her window shattered in the middle of the night, glass raining onto the floor. She screamed, clutching her baby, while neighbors peeked through blinds but didn't dare intervene. The cold wind swept in, carrying the stench of fear. She called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was gone, just shadows in the street. Claire's heart never stopped racing. Every creak of the floorboards made her think he had returned. She slept with the baby in her arms, a lamp glowing all night long. Her son stirred at her tension, crying often, as if he could sense the storm looming outside. The home that had once been her sanctuary had become a cage of terror. She messaged Alexander in the middle of the night, her words frantic. "He broke the window. I can't breathe. I'm so scared." Within seconds, his reply lit the screen. "Stay calm. I'm coming." Though he was miles away, his certainty traveled across the darkness like a shield. Claire clung to those words as though they were air. Alexander couldn't rest. He paced his penthouse, fury and helplessness twisting inside him, all his wealth, all his influence, and still he couldn't snap his fingers and end her nightmare. But he swore he would not let this spiral further. He made calls demanding security options, legal reinforcements, anything that could protect her. For the first time in years, business felt utterly meaningless. Claire sat in the dim light of her kitchen, staring at the broken window now boarded with cardboard. Her baby's soft breaths against her neck steadied her trembling. She whispered to herself, "We'll survive this. We have to." But her eyes darted to the door every few seconds, her body braced for another knock. Survival had become a constant state of readiness. The next evening, her ex's voice shattered the night. He shouted from the street below, his words venomous and slurred. "You can't keep him from me. I'll take my son, Claire. Watch me." Neighbors closed their windows, muttering about the noise, but no one came to help. His threats cut through the air like knives, piercing straight into her chest. She held her baby close, whispering lullabies through tears, hoping to drown out the sound of his rage. But the words burned into her mind, echoing long after his footsteps faded. She knew this was no longer about money. It was about control. And now his target wasn't only her. It was her child. Alexander read her terrified updates, his jaw tight, his hands balled into fists. For him, this had stopped being just a conversation days ago. Now, it was war. He vowed silently, "This man won't win. Not while I'm alive." And in that vow, he discovered a strength he hadn't known he possessed, a strength not built from wealth but from purpose. Claire sat by the crib that night. Her son's tiny fingers curled around hers. Fear gnawed at her, but so did defiance. She had lived through the ex's cruelty before, but now she wasn't the same woman. She wasn't alone. Somewhere out there, Alexander was fighting with her, even from a distance, and together they would have to face the storm head-on. The cardboard still covered Claire's window, flapping faintly in the autumn wind. Each sound outside sent her nerves on edge, her body wired for danger. She hadn't slept in days, her eyes red and heavy. Alexander called that morning, his voice low but urgent. "Claire, you can't stay there. It's no longer safe. You need to think about leaving." Her chest tightened. Leave? The thought alone twisted her stomach. She looked around the tiny apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the chipped crib, the stains on the carpet. To others, it was nothing. To her, it was the only place where her baby had taken his first steps, where lullabies had echoed in the night. Walking away felt like abandoning pieces of herself. "I can't just run," she whispered. "I have a job here, neighbors who help me. If I leave, I'll have nothing." Pride and fear mingled in her voice. She had lost so much. Already, losing her fragile stability felt unbearable. Alexander listened quietly, letting her words spill before he answered. "Claire, what you have now isn't stability," he said firmly. "It's survival. And survival under constant threat isn't living. It's waiting for disaster. You don't need to lose everything. You need to choose safety over fear." His words cut deep, sharper because she knew they were true. Still, her heart resisted. That evening, she packed a small bag for her son. Formula, diapers, his favorite stuffed bear. She told herself it was only precaution, but her hands trembled as she zipped it shut. It felt like an admission that her home was already lost. She stared at the walls, whispering apologies to the memories woven into them. Alexander worked behind the scenes, calling contacts, arranging options. A safe house in the suburbs, private and discreet. A lawyer willing to press charges harder. Even a driver willing to escort her when she was ready. His world of influence, once used for profit, was now weaponized for protection. For once, his power had purpose. Claire texted him late at night. "I don't know if I can do this. Leaving means admitting he won, that he drove us out." She stared at the glowing screen, waiting. His reply came quickly. "No, Claire. Leaving means you're choosing life. It means he doesn't get to decide your future anymore." Her throat tightened, down her tears sliding. Her baby stirred, reaching out with tiny fingers, and she held him close. "Maybe he's right," she whispered to the child, her voice breaking. "Maybe we deserve more than fear." But even as she said it, she wondered if she had the strength to step into the unknown. Change had always felt like another kind of loss. Alexander sat in his office, the city sprawling beneath him, but his thoughts fixed only on Claire. He imagined her clutching her child in the dim light, hesitating between fight and flight. He wanted to tell her she wasn't weak, that fear didn't make her less brave. It only made her human. He whispered into the empty room, "You're stronger than you think." And though Claire still resisted, the bag by the crib spoke louder than her words. Deep down, she knew a storm was coming, one she couldn't face alone. The decision she feared most was also the only path forward. And soon, fate would force her to make it. The night was eerily still, the kind of silence that presses against the skin. Claire sat in the living room with her baby asleep on her chest, the bag of essentials still by the crib. She had told herself she was ready if she needed to run, but part of her hoped she never would. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the apartment, until a violent crash shattered it. The front door buckled under a sudden blow, hinges screaming as wood splintered. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She clutched her baby tighter, his startled cries rising into the air. "No, no, please!" she whispered, retreating toward the bedroom. The second crash broke the lock, and the door burst open. Her ex stumbled in, drunk and raging, his eyes wild. "You thought you could shut me out?" he roared, glass crunching beneath his boots as he stepped inside. His presence filled the room like a storm, thick with the smell of alcohol and sweat. Claire's knees trembled, but she planted herself between him and her child. "Get out," she said, her voice breaking, yet fiercer than she felt. He laughed, a sound as sharp as broken glass. "This is my family, Claire. You don't get to erase me. That baby is mine." He lurched closer, his shadow stretching across the walls. The baby screamed, his cries blending with Claire's racing heartbeat. Every muscle in her body screamed to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Desperation gave her strength. She reached for her phone, fumbling to dial Alexander's number. But before she could press call, her ex's hand shot out, knocking it from her grip. The phone clattered across the floor, skidding under the sofa. "No one's coming to save you," he spat, leaning closer, his eyes bloodshot with rage. Claire backed into the corner, holding her son like a shield. "Please don't do this," she begged, tears streaming down her face. But her ex's sneer only deepened. He slammed his fist against the wall beside her head, the sound booming like thunder. The baby's wails filled the apartment, each cry slicing through her soul. At that very moment, Alexander's phone buzzed on his desk. Claire's unfinished call had left him with nothing but silence on the other end. His gut twisted. He grabbed his coat, ignoring the late hour, and rushed to his car. Tires screeched against the pavement as he sped through the city, guided only by instinct and the memory of her fear. Back in the apartment, Claire's ex grabbed the diaper bag and hurled it across the room. "You think you can just walk away from me? You owe me everything." His voice cracked with fury, with desperation, with the twisted belief that control was love. Claire screamed, "You'll never take him!" clutching her baby so tightly it hurt. The confrontation escalated in chaos, shouts, sobs, the baby's terrified cries. Outside, a neighbor peeked through the door, then shut it quickly, too afraid to intervene. Claire's world shrank to the space between her ex's looming figure and the fragile body in her arms. The walls seemed to close in, trapping her with the man she had escaped once before. And then, just as his hand reached toward her, headlights cut through the darkness outside. A car door slammed, footsteps pounded up the stairs. For the first time, Claire saw fear flicker in his eyes. The storm had arrived at her doorstep, but this time she wasn't alone. The apartment door hung broken, swaying slightly on its bent hinges. Claire's ex turned toward the sudden noise of footsteps pounding up the stairwell. His eyes narrowed, rage and panic colliding. "Who the hell?" he began, but the words died as Alexander stepped into the doorway, his coat still damp from the rain, his jaw set like stone. Alexander didn't speak at first. His gaze swept the room, the shattered glass, the overturned bag, Claire cornered with her baby trembling in her arms. His chest tightened at the sight. He had walked into boardrooms filled with sharks and never flinched, but this was different. This was raw, dangerous, human, and he wasn't going to back down. "Leave," Alexander said, his voice low, steady and sharper than steel. "You've done enough damage." Claire's ex laughed, a cruel, slurred sound. "Who do you think you are? Some rich hero? This is my family. You don't belong here." He stepped forward, shoulders squared, fists ready. The tension in the air cracked like lightning. Claire clutched her baby tighter, her back pressed against the wall. Her heart pounded, torn between terror and relief. She had never seen anyone stand up to her ex without fear. Yet now the two men faced each other, the air so heavy she could barely breathe. For the first time, she wasn't the only shield between her child and the storm. Her ex lunged, shoving Alexander hard against the wall. The sound echoed through the tiny apartment, rattling picture frames. But Alexander didn't falter. He shoved back, his voice rising, "You will not touch them again." Years of controlled restraint gave way to raw force. He had never fought for his own life before, but for hers he would. Neighbors opened their doors, drawn by the noise. Gasps filled the hallway as the struggle spilled outside, fists flying, curses slicing through the night. Shouted for the police, while others whispered fearfully from behind half-open doors. The baby's cries pierced the chaos, grounding Claire in the reality of what was at stake. Sirens wailed in the distance, their red and blue glow soon flashing against the cracked walls. Her ex fought like a cornered animal, wild and desperate, every punch fueled by years of control slipping away. But Alexander held firm, pushing him back, keeping himself between Claire and the man who had terrorized her. When the police stormed in, the scene froze in a blaze of light and shouts. Officers wrestled Claire's ex to the ground, his fury spilling into curses as handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. His voice cracked with rage. "This isn't over. He's my son." But the law had finally caught up to him, and this time his words carried no power. Claire sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face, her baby pressed close against her chest. The adrenaline shook her body, but relief surged through her veins. For the first time in years, someone else had stood in the fire with her, and she had survived it. Alexander knelt beside her, his hand hovering protectively near her shoulder. "You're safe now," he whispered. The hallway echoed with murmurs, the flashing lights reflecting in frightened eyes. Yet, within the chaos, a quiet truth settled over Claire. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, her hope, and as she looked up at Alexander, standing steady amidst the wreckage, she knew the fight for freedom was finally beginning to turn. The flashing lights faded as the police car pulled away, carrying Claire's ex into the night. His shouts echoed briefly, then disappeared into silence. Claire stood in the doorway of her battered apartment, clutching her baby, her body still trembling from the storm. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel poisoned by his presence. The night was broken, but she was still standing. Alexander remained by her side, his hand hovering near her back, not to control, but to steady. He didn't speak at first. He simply gave her the space to breathe. She rocked her child gently, her heart still pounding, her eyes fixed on the street where danger had finally been carried away. A whisper escaped her lips. "It's over. It's finally over." The neighbors slowly emerged from their doors, offering timid words of comfort. One woman brought a blanket, another offered tea. Their faces carried guilt for the silence of past years, but also relief. Claire accepted the blanket, wrapping it around her son, her tears soaking into the fabric. For once, the eyes on her weren't full of pity. They were full of respect. Inside the apartment, the damage was plain. Broken wood, shattered glass, belongings scattered across the floor. Yet beneath the chaos, a fragile peace settled. Claire sank onto the sofa, rocking her son, until his cries softened into steady breaths. Alexander sat across from her, his gaze gentle, his usually sharp posture softened by humility. He didn't promise her a fairy tale ending. Instead, he said simply, "You're free now, and whatever comes next, you won't face it alone." His words weren't grand, but they carried more weight than any riches he owned. Claire met his eyes, searching for hidden motives, but all she found was sincerity. It was enough to let her walls lower, if only a little. Her baby stirred in her arms, his tiny hand brushing against her cheek. Claire kissed his forehead, whispering, "You're safe, my love. We're safe." The sound of her own words startled her. How long had it been since she could say them without lying? The truth tasted sweet, fragile, but real. Alexander leaned back, his thoughts drifting. For the first time in years, he felt purpose burning in his chest. Deals, contracts, and fortunes had never filled the void inside him, but this moment, protecting Claire and her son, had. His late mother's words echoed once more. Kindness is the only treasure worth guarding. And now he understood. Claire gazed out the cracked window, where dawn was beginning to break. The sky shifted from black to pale gold, light spilling into the room. She had survived another night, but this time survival carried hope. She didn't know what the future would hold, only that she wasn't walking into it alone anymore. Her phone buzzed with a final message from Alexander. Sometimes the wrong message finds exactly the right hands. Claire smiled faintly, tears glistening on her cheeks. She had never believed in fate, but tonight she couldn't deny its hand in her story. A mistake had become salvation. As the sun rose higher, warming the broken apartment, Claire closed her eyes and held her son close. The past no longer chained her, the present no longer suffocated her, and the future, though uncertain, no longer terrified her. A new dawn had come, carrying the quiet promise that love, dignity, and safety were finally within reach. Epilogue. Reflection. Sometimes the smallest accidents change the course of entire lives. Claire never intended for her desperate plea to reach Alexander's inbox, just as he never expected that a single late-night message would tear down the walls around his heart. Yet here they were, two broken souls who had found strength in each other, proof that even in the darkest places light can find its way through the cracks. Her story is not just about survival. It is about dignity, about the courage to draw lines, and the power of being seen when the world tries to erase you. His story is not about wealth or power. It is about rediscovering what it means to be human, to fight for something that cannot be bought or sold. Together, their paths remind us that help doesn't always arrive wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it comes in the form of a stranger willing to listen. And now I want to ask you, if a plea like Claire's found its way to you, what would you do? Would you turn away, or would you become the voice that says, "You're not alone. Take a moment to reflect and share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need hope today. Because stories like this are not just tales, they are reminders that kindness, even from unexpected places, can change everything.